Good afternoon and welcome to our latest Posturite webinar. I'm pleased to say that today we're going to be talking about mental health in the workplace. And we have Andrea Youngman from Remploy who's going to be talking to us today. Andrea is a National Business Development Manager at Remploy, and she has over 10 years of experience working within welfare to work and has specialised in building mutually beneficial partnerships with large employers within the disability and diversity space. Remploy has managed to support over 5,000 people in Britain suffering with conditions such as depression, anxiety or stress, and for allow them to remain in or return to work. So now, with 91 million working days lost every year due to mental health, I think now is a very good time to have this webinar and talk about mental health in the workplace. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, it's absolutely great to be involved in such an important discussion today, particularly as this week sees the Mental Health Awareness Week with this year's theme revolving around relationships. So I do encourage everybody on the call to take a look at the Mental Health Foundation website, which has some fantastic links. But today we're going to be talking about mental health in the workplace, focusing on some challenges and solutions for employers. So, as Catherine said, I'm from Remploy. We're the UK's largest provider of services to disabled people. We're a national organisation and we work with employers to attract, recruit and sustain disabled talent. We work with a broad spectrum of disability and today we're going to really focus on mental health, as I said. Here at Remploy, we're more vocational experts rather than medical clinicians. So we work alongside occupational health, EAP and HR specialists within organisations. To date, we work with over 2,500 employers, so our reach is really, really quite far. So if we can take a look at the first slide, the agenda for today and what we will be looking to cover. Today we're going to be focusing on some of the challenges faced by employers, and we're going to cover off some of those themes through absenteeism and presenteeism. We're going to look at some hints and tips, some real simple solutions that employers can really start to think about to engage in the mental well-being of their employee workforce. And then we're going to promote some of the support that is available. At the end of today's webinar, we will be sharing a link with you to a case study of an individual who has experienced mental ill health in the workplace and the approach that they took to overcoming. We are going to keep it fairly high level. There is an opportunity for questions, so if you do have any questions, please do field them my way throughout. Next slide. Absenteeism. So this slide is really showing the impact of poor mental health and what it directly has on employers in terms of the cost. So the cost is absolutely huge to employers, 26 billion a year. But actually, what we also encourage employers to think about is not just focus on what the cost is to their business of poor mental well-being, but actually the knock-on impact on colleagues. So we hear about disruption to productivity, the impact of a member of a team being off work due to mental ill health, and then the follow-up impact that may then have on other members of the team. The conflict that can then arise because of those additional challenges. And sometimes a diversion of time and focus away from the employer and the employee if mental health isn't really being tackled. So we can see that employers would absolutely benefit from support and guidance really to help address these issues. If we just move over to the next slide, presenteeism. So presenteeism is a concept that maybe employers are slightly less familiar with. Presenteeism, what is it? Well, actually, essentially in a nutshell, it describes reduced performance. The Centre for Mental Health estimate that presenteeism costs the UK economy £15 billion in mental health alone, as quite often mental health goes undiagnosed. So the reality is everyone, all of us, experience periods of mental health in our working life. We don't have to necessarily be diagnosed. We don't need to even sometimes go to the doctors. But there are periods of time in all our lives where our natural resilience to our own personal mental health is going to be lower. That might be a reaction to a life event, a bereavement, a change in a relationship, or a change to a computer system at work. Everything affects everybody differently. So what we'd like to work with employers to understand is by having an awareness of better mental health, actually, and understanding some of the behaviours and interacting and intercepting before those behaviours lead an individual to end up in crisis and being off work, there are some really simple solutions that could be implemented to avoid some of this. We're now just going to have a look at some of those organisational solutions. So at an organisational level, some practical strategies can really be adopted to encourage attendance and support for employees at work. So by creating a culture of openness and really promoting and talking about mental health, normalising mental health in the workplace is a real benefit. Providing training for line managers, encouraging line managers to have the confidence to approach people that they suspect to be in crisis, to really engage and have that difficult conversation. It's something that many people want to do but feel, because they don't want to get it wrong and end up making the situation worse, perhaps don't do anything at all. So by really giving training for employees and managers, making people aware of some of the common signs really of mental health and how it can impact on people, it can really help bring that organisational disability confidence to a high level. That can also be done through promoting wellbeing at work, again, encouraging signposting, offering counselling, making sure EAP systems, occupational health, are providing signposting and support for people within the organisation that disclose and come to say they've got they're in crisis and they have difficulty with their mental health. And again, a really important factor is ensuring that there's consistency of management behaviours. So people like to know where they stand, and they like to know that that is common throughout the business, so they can approach any manager and their concerns be treated the same way. If we just take a look at the following slide, so some solutions for the individual. So these are some of the most commonly used adjustments. What Remploy would always say is always ask the individual what support it is that they feel that they need. Because, we recognise that no two people, even if they have the same condition, want to be, want the same things or feel the same things, as no two people are the same. So consider flexible working patterns to accommodate fluctuating conditions. So by that, we might want to think about, are there periods in the day when, call handling times are a lot higher, or the complexities of the calls. It might be that somebody's really struggling with their sleep. So actually, it'd be much better to have later working patterns. Somebody might be on a medication and just adjusting to that medication, and again, they might not be able to drive, or they might struggle using public transport when it's at really busy times. Again, identifying something as simple as a workplace buddy, so someone that's there that can keep a friendly eye on a colleague, somebody that's known as well, so it's somebody that's got a passion and a real interest in being that sort of disability network champion, if you like, for people with mental wellbeing issues. Offering structured work and routine as well. So again, really just going back to offering that security and clarity for the individual that might be struggling with their mental health can have a real positive impact on their ability to be able to sustain and remain in employment. And again, if somebody is off work due to their mental health, engaging in a really clear return to work plan and, suggesting a phased return as well. And also considering, where possible, avoiding pressurised situations when the organisation or the employer or the line manager knows that the person's particularly unwell. So what Remploy would encourage is a discussion and a supported approach, and that's really sometimes all that's needed to help individuals remain in the workplace when they're undergoing a period of crisis in their mental health. But sometimes we recognise that actually, the situation might be slightly more complex, and actually somebody may benefit from additional expert support. And that can sometimes really help the individual remain back in employment. So what Remploy would like to talk to you about today is our next slide, which is the Access to Work Mental Health Support Service. So this is a fully funded, absolutely no cost to the employer service. It's national, so it's national to the UK, operates in Scotland, Wales and England. And the service is delivered completely by Remploy nationally. It is for anyone employed, including those who are self-employed. And I'd just really like to talk through the service at a fairly high level again, but we will be sharing the slides with you after today's call, and Posturite will also be providing my contact details directly should anybody want to get in touch or have further information. So if we have a look at what the next slide, the objectives and aims of the service. So the aim of the service is to support employees with mental health conditions to retain their employment. So it's really fairly basic what it's there to achieve. It's absolutely there to support people in employment with a mental health condition. The emphasis is on wellbeing and positivity at work. As I've already mentioned, it's of no financial cost to the employer. So far, the service has been an absolutely phenomenal success. Remploy have so far had over 5,000 people referred to the service with a broad range of mental health conditions, and we are still running at over a 92% success rate. So what we mean by that is, as of that 5,000 people that have accessed the service, over 92% of them have remained in employment at the end of the 6 months support package. The service is delivered by Remploy specialist mental health consultants who are really experienced in supporting people with mental health conditions in a vocational, practical employment setting. Next slide. So we're just going to talk through some of the eligibility criteria. So in essence, the only eligibility is that the individual needs to be in paid employment and have a mental health condition which can be self-diagnosed. The most common conditions that are referred are stress, anxiety, depression, and really what we want to encourage people to think about when they're accessing the services is that actually, they can be very challenging for people on a day-to-day basis. So people that are presenting with depression, stress and anxiety, and they could be going into panic mode, or they could be having sweats, they might not be coping. If that is having an impact on them as an individual, then we really encourage them to reach out to the service. And as I say, they don't need to have a medical diagnosis for that. We also understand that the mental health condition may not be the primary health condition, and in fact it's really quite common that it is the comorbid condition. So what we look to do with Remploy is consider both the mental health condition and the other health condition that they may have, or disability, and we really work at those together, so we don't just focus on the mental health condition in isolation. And actually almost over 20% of people referred to the service so far have a coexisting neurological condition such as dyslexia. Just a little bit more on the next slide. So as I've already mentioned, a really fantastic rate of 92% of people who have accessed the service have been successful in remaining in employment. So what do they get? Well, what they get is up to 6 months work-based support with a dedicated consultant. At the end of those 6 months, if the individual feels they still require a bit more support, then they can absolutely be re-referred back onto the service at the end. They will get a minimum of 3 face-to-face meetings with a consultant, and then the follow-up engagement will be done over the telephone or email, really as required and as the preference of the individual. The individual will have the choice whether the employer is involved or not. We will always encourage, where we find the most success is where we have employer, employee and Remploy facilitating. So we would always encourage, when it's relevant and right, that the employer is brought in, involved, and is consulted and advised on the plan and the approach. But it is actually the choice of the individual as to when that employer involvement may happen. There will be an assessment of the individual's role and really to try to get an understanding of any workplace difficulties, and then a support plan will be designed and developed for the individual. We're always focusing on the workplace wellbeing, and there will also be some self-esteem assessments conducted also. There will be signposting at the end, so if that's to other services, then we will work with the individual to understand what's also available locally, or work with the employer to think about if there's any counselling or any other services available via the EAP or the OH route. And then each person who completes the service will get an exit report. And as part of that exit report, and throughout this, there will be a plan in place which really helps the individual to understand what their own contributions are to supporting themselves to remain in employment, and also any factors that their employer needs to be aware of to help facilitate and accommodate any of those suggestions for change. So that's the service in a nutshell. As I say, we work with over 2,500 employers. At present, we are receiving upwards of 300 referrals from employers or individuals nationally. Remploy want to absolutely grow this service. So as part of today's call, it really is a call to action really for yourselves as individuals, yourselves as line managers, yourself as friends of people, and people with family. If you feel that there are people that you know that would benefit from this service, then please do help support Remploy in getting this service known. It's quite common that people get this mixed up with access to work, which deals with other things such as in-work support or desk chairs, mice, but actually this is called access to work, but is absolutely specific to mental well-being. If we take a look at the next slide, there is a case study available which I would encourage everybody on this call to have a look at. We're not going to show it today because it's linked to YouTube, and there are quite often some technical difficulties with these things. But Posturite will be sending you out the link to this case study. It is essentially somebody who's accessed this service themselves telling about what it did for them, how it helped them in returning to employment. So again, please do have a look at that. So the final slide from me is how you access this service. We would encourage you to go directly through Remploy. You can go via Access to Work, but if you use the telephone number which is shown there, the 0300 456 8114 number, all referrals will come directly to Remploy. We have SLAs in place, as you would expect with any government contract programme. So there will be 48 hours as a maximum before you receive a call back from Remploy, and we would expect you to have your first appointment with a consultant within 7 days of making your initial referral to the service. So that's the information from me at Remploy. I'd like to put back to Catherine to understand if there's any further information or questions for me, and I'd just like to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And as you might expect, we do have some questions, which is a bit of a shame since I've got some too, but we'll see if we can get through most of these. We've had a question about companies who are creating sort of mental health first aiders. And I'm going to roll a couple of them together. But first of all, should this be encouraged, and what should people be careful of? And are there any insurance issues to that?
Okay. I mean, I absolutely think that having, Remploy as an organisation would be encouraging employers to be thinking about having mental health first aiders, as you would have any other first aid or fire marshal within your organisation. The basic premise of what the mental health first aid does is equips and provides confidence to select people within an organisation to really get that first-hand knowledge about how to almost band-aid somebody in crisis, have the confidence to support them, but more importantly, to be able to signpost people in crisis to specific local support. From a Remploy perspective, we would be absolutely encouraging employers to think about that 2-day course. It is something that Remploy does, so I can provide further details. In terms of insurance perspective, I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to really give a past comment on that. I can certainly take it away and find out from our organisation's perspective, but I think you would probably need to consult with your legal teams for a definitive answer around that.
Thank you, Andrea. If you do get any feedback, if you could share it with us, and we'll pop it on the website with other questions and answers from this webinar.
Absolutely, Catherine.
We have had a question about referrals, asking whether the individual can refer themselves or whether it has to be referred. So who can make the referral?
Fantastic question. Yeah. So the main premise of the programme is that it's an individual-led service. Therefore, we would always try to encourage the individual, as we say, to sort of make the initial call. However, due to the fact that people accessing the service may be in crisis or low confidence, there are allowances for either a family friend or the employer to make that initial call, which we all know quite often can be the hardest hurdle. So as long as the individual consents, so if the individual is present, then there is absolutely no problem or challenge at all in a family friend or the employer making the initial call. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. We've got a couple of cynical people out there like myself saying, so if it is free, who's paying for this?
Yeah, well, absolutely, we all are. The government's paying for this. So, in essence, if somebody, there's evidence which suggests, if we all know that actually somebody with a mental health condition is better off in some form of work. So even if they're not able to manage their full role, actually maintaining some elements of work is really, really helpful to them, and actually means that they're more likely to return to work. So if we know that somebody's absent from work due to a mental health condition, they're not engaging with their employer and they're not engaging with any attempts to return to work, then unfortunately the chances of the individual ever returning to that position or a other job are, to get significantly reduced, which means cynically they will end up on a not work job centre plus looking for work, or ESA. So this is the government's attempt to proactively look at how we can support people to remain in employment without having to get so desperate that they leave employment because maybe a relationship's broken down with their employer. So it's a program to try and address some of those realities.
Brilliant. Well, that's quite reassuring, and let's hope it works. Can I just ask about the local the face-to-face assessments you were saying? Somebody's asked, are these done locally, or do people have to travel long ways for the face-to-face support?
Yeah, no, another great question. So all our vocational consultants are based nationally, so we would travel to the individual. So we've got a network of consultants up and down the country, so we would travel.
Okay, that's great. Now, I think this is probably going to have to our last question. We've had quite a lot coming in, so there will be available on the website. But again, this is one. What would be your top tip to constructively challenge a culture where people are very sceptical about mental health, and suggest that maybe people just pull their socks up and get on with it? What would be the first step to trying to change things within an employment arena?
Yeah. I mean, we all hear the horror stories, don't we? And I think really the top tip would be for me is to equip line managers with some disability confidence around how to approach those difficult conversations. So quite often we hear stories where somebody's maybe off with mental health, and an employer's not contacted them for 3-4 months. So they're just really, really not great situations for people to be in. And quite often it's because the line manager suspected that something wasn't right but didn't say anything at all. So the top tip for today is really encourage your businesses, encourage yourselves to think about some training for either frontline managers or department managers. So when they're spotting people in crisis, when people are talking about whether it's productivity's dipping, or Andrea's coming in a not great mood, or they notice changes, give people the confidence to approach in that first difficult conversation, because you're being the lifeline to the person, and it could absolutely positively impact and change how things manifest. That's the top tip from me, Catherine.
Thank you, Andrea. And I know I did fib a bit because I thought that was going to be the last question, but one has just come in which I think is important just to clarify. Very short. Does somebody have to be absent before they refer themselves to this service?
No, absolutely not. Unfortunately for us, if somebody's absent, they should have accessed the service a few months before. What we want to be doing is working. And sometimes the reason that we focus on absence is because that's when the person's disclosed to the organisation or to someone or to themselves that they have a health condition, a mental health condition. And what we want to be doing is working with people before they've gone off, so we can really, really help reduce that, the risk that they will be going off for their own. Work is actually a great distraction for mental health. It actually usually forms a great part of someone's coping strategy to maintain health, a healthy mind. So what we want to do is really enhance and support people before they go off work. So another great question.
Well, that's why I thought I'd better sneak it in. Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to sort of let you off the hook there. Thank you so much for that. And for everybody, that's the end of our webinar today, but I would love to have you all back for our next webinar about ageing in the workplace, being an ageing individual I think it's a very important thing, and that is going to be taking place on the 17th of June, and that is going to be by Peter Buckle. So that will be a fascinating webinar, so please dial in for that. And remember that a copy of this webinar will be available on our website with the FAQs when Andrea's managed to get around to them. So have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Goodbye now.